I woke up at 3 in the morning to the sound of shattering glass and the howl of wind tearing through my house like a freight train. And for a split second, I thought the blizzard had finally broken through on its own, until I heard the unmistakable thud of footsteps on my living room floor. My name is Victor Olson, and I had been living in the Meadowbrook Springs community in Buffalo, New York, for about 8 months when this happened. The development was one of those modern cookie-cutter neighborhoods, with strict HOA rules about everything from mailbox colors to the exact shade of beige you could paint your shutters. I had bought the 3-bedroom ranch house as a fresh start after my divorce, thinking a quiet suburban life would help me get back on track. What I did not anticipate was Deborah Patterson, the HOA president, who seemed to make it her personal mission to find violations in everyone's property. The blizzard had started 2 days earlier. Weather reports called it a once-in-a-decade storm, and they were not exaggerating. By the first evening, we already had 18 inches of snow with winds gusting up to 60 miles per hour. The power had gone out around midnight on the first day, and the temperature inside my house had been steadily dropping ever since. I had a gas fireplace that still worked without electricity, and I had been camping out in my living room with blankets and supplies, managing to stay reasonably warm. But now someone was in my house, and I could hear them cursing and stomping around downstairs. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand, but the screen showed no signal, and the battery was nearly dead from the cold. The charging cables were useless without power. My heart was hammering as I reached for the baseball bat I kept beside my bed. The bedroom was pitch black, and I had to feel my way toward the door, trying to move quietly while my mind raced through possibilities. Had someone gotten desperate in the storm? Was it a looter taking advantage of the blackout? I crept down the hallway, the bat clutched in my sweaty hands despite the cold. The wind was roaring through the lower level now, and I could feel the temperature drop with every step I took down the stairs. When I reached the landing and peered around the corner into the living room, I could barely believe what I was seeing in the dim glow of my dying fireplace. Deborah Patterson, all 5 feet 2 inches of her, was standing in the middle of my living room, shaking snow off her expensive parka and brushing glass shards off her sleeves. My large front window was completely shattered, with shards of glass scattered across the hardwood floor and snow already starting to pile up on my furniture. The Arctic wind was pouring in through the opening, and within minutes, my warm sanctuary had become an ice box. "What the hell are you doing?" I shouted, flipping on my flashlight and pointing it at her. She jumped and spun around, her hand flying to her chest. "Oh my God, Victor, you scared me half to death." "I scared you. You just broke into my house. You smashed my window." Deborah had the audacity to look offended. Her blonde hair was styled in that classic Karen cut, shorter in the back and longer in the front, though it was currently disheveled from the storm. She was probably in her late 40s, with the kind of tight-lipped expression that suggested she had spent decades perfecting her disapproving glare. "I did not break in," she said, brushing more snow off herself and moving closer to my fireplace. "I used reasonable emergency access to seek shelter during a life-threatening weather event. My house lost heat completely, and I could not get my car started to go anywhere else." "Your house was the closest one with a working fireplace. I could see the glow from outside." "So you broke my window." "I knocked first," she said defensively. "You did not answer. I had no choice. I was freezing to death out there." I stared at her in disbelief. Snow was now swirling around my living room, and I could already feel the temperature plummeting. Everything near the window was getting coated in white powder. You could not have walked to literally any other house. You live 4 houses down. There are 2 houses between us. The Hendersons are in Florida for the winter, and the Michaels family left yesterday to stay with relatives. I saw them packing up. Your house was the only option. That does not give you the right to smash my window. Do you have any idea what you have just done? It is negative 15 degrees outside with the wind chill. My whole house is going to freeze now. Deborah pulled off her gloves and held her hands toward the fireplace. We can deal with the window situation once the storm passes. Right now, we need to focus on staying warm. Do you have any blankets we can use to cover that opening? The sheer entitlement in her voice made my blood boil. This was the same woman who had fined me $50 because my grass was a quarter-inch too long in August. The same woman who had sent me 3 violation notices about my Halloween decorations being up 2 days past the November 1st deadline. The same woman who had threatened to put a lien on my property because I parked my truck on the street overnight once when my garage door opener broke. There is no we here. You broke into my house, Deborah. You committed a crime. She waved her hand dismissively. Do not be dramatic. This is an emergency situation. The HOA bylaws clearly state that in cases of community emergency, reasonable measures can be taken for the safety of residents. Show me where it says you can break into someone's house and destroy their property. The spirit of the rule is what matters. Any reasonable person would understand that preserving human life takes precedence over property damage. Now, are you going to help me board up that window, or are we both going to freeze while you stand there being difficult? I wanted to throw her back out into the snow, but the practical part of my brain knew she was right about one thing. We needed to cover that window immediately, or the house would become uninhabitable. I was furious, but I was not going to let both of us freeze to death out of spite. Fine, I said through gritted teeth. But we are going to have a serious conversation about this once the storm is over. And you are paying for that window. We will see what my lawyer has to say about that, Deborah muttered, but I heard her. I had some plywood in the garage left over from a shelving project. Getting it while the blizzard raged outside was miserable. The wind nearly ripped the garage door out of my hands, and the snow was so thick I could barely see 3 feet in front of me. By the time I dragged 2 4-by-8 sheets of plywood into the house through the side door, I was covered in snow and shaking from the cold. Deborah, to her credit, had found my toolbox and was attempting to clear the broken glass away from the window frame. She had also located my emergency LED lantern and set it up to give us better light than my failing flashlight. We need to work quickly, she said. All business now. The temperature is dropping fast. We worked in tense silence, screwing the plywood sheets over the broken window from the inside. It was not pretty, and gaps around the edges still let in cold air and some snow, but it was infinitely better than nothing. I used an entire roll of duct tape trying to seal the edges. Then we hung several heavy blankets over the plywood for extra insulation. By the time we finished, we were both exhausted and freezing. The living room was a disaster, with glass shards, puddles of melted snow, and tools scattered everywhere. But at least the howling wind was somewhat muffled now, and the fireplace was starting to warm the immediate area again. I collapsed onto my couch, and Deborah sat in the armchair across from me without asking. She pulled one of my blankets around her shoulders and held her hands toward the fire. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I really was freezing. My house got so cold I could see my breath, and I started to worry about hypothermia." "You could have died breaking my window," I said. "You could have cut an artery on that glass." "I used a patio stone from your garden," she said. "I threw it through from a distance. I was careful." "That does not make it okay," she sighed. "Look, I understand you are upset, but what would you have had me do? knock on your door until I collapsed from exposure. You were clearly asleep. You would not have heard me. You could have tried harder. You could have gone to another neighbor further away. You could have called emergency services. My phone died. The cold drained the battery, and I did try other options first. I am not some crazy person who just goes around breaking windows for fun. I laughed bitterly at that. Could have fooled me. You certainly go around fining people for fun. Her expression hardened. That is my job as HOA president. I enforce the rules that everyone agreed to when they bought property here. Those rules maintain property values for the entire community. Those rules are ridiculous, and you enforce them like some kind of power-hungry dictator. You know the Johnsons had to spend $3,000 replacing their fence because you decided the stain color was not on the approved list, even though it was basically identical. Rules are rules, Deborah said. If we let one person slide, everyone else will want exceptions too. That is how communities fall apart. Communities fall apart when the people running them act like petty tyrants, I shot back. We sat in hostile silence for a while, the only sound the crackling of the fire and the muffled howl of the wind outside. Despite my anger, exhaustion was pulling at me. It had to be close to 5 in the morning now, and the adrenaline from the break-in was wearing off. So what happens now? Deborah asked. Are we going to sit here glaring at each other until the storm passes? I am going to try to get some sleep, I said. You can stay until morning, until it is safe enough to get you back to your house. But then we are going to deal with the legal ramifications of what you did tonight. Legal ramifications. She actually looked amused. You cannot be serious. You broke into my house, Deborah. You destroyed my property. That is breaking and entering. That is criminal damage. Both of those are crimes. In an emergency situation, there are provisions for. I do not care about provisions. You did not have permission to enter my home. You caused several $1,000s in damage. The law is pretty clear about this. Her amusement faded. If you try to press charges against me, I will make your life in this community a living hell. I will find every single violation possible on your property. I will fine you for things you did not even know were rules. I will make you wish you had never moved to Meadowbrook Springs. Is that a threat? It is a statement of fact. You do not want to make an enemy of me, Victor. I stood up, my hands clenched into fists. You know what, Deborah? You already are my enemy. You have been since the day I moved in, and I am done being intimidated by you. Tomorrow, when this storm clears, I am calling the police and filing a report. What happens after that is up to the legal system. You are making a huge mistake, she said coldly. The only mistake I made was not standing up to you sooner. Now I am going to sleep in my bedroom, since my living room is currently a disaster zone thanks to you. There are more blankets in the hall closet if you need them. Do not touch anything else in my house. I left her sitting by the fire and went back upstairs, my heart pounding with anger and residual adrenaline. I knew I would not sleep well, but I had to get away from her before I said or did something I would regret. The next morning, the wind had died down somewhat, though snow was still falling heavily. I came downstairs to find Deborah already awake, sitting wrapped in blankets and looking miserable. She had found my emergency radio and was listening to the weather report. The announcer was saying that the blizzard was expected to continue for at least another 12 to 18 hours, with total accumulation predicted to reach 36 inches or more. Roads are completely impassable, Deborah said without looking at me. They are saying not to travel unless it is a life or death emergency. The mayor has declared a state of emergency for the city. Great, I muttered, heading to the kitchen. My refrigerator was dead, of course, but I had moved most of my perishables outside to the back porch where they would stay frozen. I had stocked up on non-perishables before the storm, including bread, peanut butter, canned soup, and other supplies that did not require cooking. I made myself a peanut butter sandwich and ate it standing at the counter, looking out at the wall of white beyond my kitchen window. The world had completely disappeared. I could not even see my fence line, just an endless swirl of snow. Deborah appeared in the doorway. Could I have something to eat? I have not had anything since yesterday afternoon. I wanted to refuse, but I was not that petty. I made her a sandwich and poured some lukewarm water from my emergency supply into a glass. She took them without comment and went back to the living room. The day passed with excruciating slowness. We barely spoke to each other except for necessary communication about keeping the fire going or checking the window covering. The temperature inside the house hovered around 55 degrees in the living room and probably 45 or lower in the rest of the house. We both stayed close to the fireplace, wrapped in layers. By evening, I was starting to worry about how long the storm would last and how much longer we would be trapped together. But the weather report said the worst should pass by morning, with cleanup beginning by afternoon if conditions allowed. That night, we took turns sleeping, making sure someone was always awake to tend the fire. During my watch, around 2 in the morning, I found myself studying Deborah's sleeping form. She looked older when she slept, more vulnerable. For a brief moment, I felt a flicker of sympathy. But then I remembered the broken window, the glass all over my floor, the damage she had caused, and the sympathy evaporated. When dawn finally came, the snow had stopped. The wind had died to a gentle breeze, and weak sunlight filtered through the clouds. The world outside looked like an alien landscape, with drifts piled 6 feet high in some places and strange sculptural shapes where the wind had carved the snow into peaks and valleys. "I should be able to make it home now," Deborah said, standing and folding the blankets she had been using. "Good, I need to make some phone calls." She turned to face me, her expression hard again. "I am warning you one last time, if you pursue this, you will regret it." "Is that another threat?" "It is advice, but suit yourself." She pulled on her parka and boots, then headed for the front door. She paused before opening it. "For what it is worth, I am sorry about the window, but I do not regret my choice. I did what I had to do to survive." Then she was gone, trudging through the waist-deep snow toward her house 4 doors down. I watched through the small window beside my door until she disappeared into her own home. As soon as she was gone, I plugged my phone into my car charger and let it power up. The cell towers were apparently working again, because I got a signal after a few minutes. I had dozens of messages from friends and family checking on me, but I ignored them for now. Instead, I called the Buffalo Police Department non-emergency line. It took a while to get through, as they were obviously swamped with storm-related calls. "Buffalo PD, how can I help you?" A tired-sounding woman answered. "I need to report a breaking and entering that occurred during the storm," I said. "Are you in immediate danger?" "No, it happened 2 nights ago. The person is no longer in my home." "Okay, I will need to take down your information and someone will follow up with you. Please be aware that response times are delayed due to the storm. We are prioritizing active emergencies." I gave her all the details: my name, address, what had happened, and Deborah's information. The woman took it all down without comment, though I could hear typing in the background. "So this person broke your window and entered your home without permission, is that correct?" "Yes." She claimed it was an emergency, that she needed shelter from the storm. "But she destroyed my property and entered my home illegally." "Did she steal anything or cause any other damage besides the broken window?" "No, just the window. but that is going to cost several $1,000s to replace, and my house lost all its heat because of it." "Okay, sir. I have all this documented. An officer will contact you to take a full statement, probably within the next few days once we get through the emergency backlog. In the meantime, I would recommend documenting everything with photos and keeping any evidence." "I will, thank you." After I hung up, I spent the next hour taking detailed photos of everything. The broken glass still scattered around despite Deborah's half-hearted cleanup attempt, the boarded-up window, the water damage from melted snow, all of it. I also took photos of the outside, showing the distance from Deborah's house to mine and the other houses in between. The next call I made was to my insurance company. That conversation was less satisfying, as the agent explained that my deductible was $1,000 and that vandalism claims could affect my rates. She also said that if Deborah's homeowner's insurance accepted liability, they might cover it instead. But she strongly recommended I file a police report first, which I had already done. Then I called a board-up service that advertised 24-hour emergency response. They said they could not get to me for at least 2 days due to the storm aftermath and the number of calls they had received. But they took my information and promised to call when a crew became available. Finally, I called my brother Derek, who lived in Rochester and was a paralegal at a law firm there. "Victor, thank God," he said when he answered. "I have been worried sick. Are you okay? Did you make it through the storm?" "I am fine, but I have a situation. Do you have a few minutes?" "Of course. What is going on?" I explained everything that had happened with Deborah. Derek listened without interrupting, which was one of his professional skills that I appreciated. When I finished, he let out a low whistle. "Okay, that is definitely breaking and entering, probably second-degree burglary in New York, and the property damage is criminal mischief. The question is whether she has a viable necessity defense." "A what necessity defense?" "It is a legal principle that says someone can break certain laws if doing so was necessary to prevent greater harm. Like if you broke into someone's car to save a baby locked inside on a hot day. The law recognizes that sometimes circumstances require emergency action." My stomach sank. So she might get away with it? Not necessarily. For a necessity defense to work, she would have to prove that breaking into your specific house was the only reasonable option available to her, that the danger was immediate and serious, and that the harm prevented was greater than the harm caused. From what you are telling me, that is a tough sell. She had other options. She could have tried harder to get into other houses. She could have stayed in her own house longer with extra layers and blankets. She could have tried to reach emergency services. Breaking your window was not her only choice. So I should definitely pursue charges. That is up to you, but you have a legitimate case. The bigger question is what you want out of this. Do you want her prosecuted criminally, or do you mainly want her to pay for the damage? "Both," I said. "I want her to face consequences for what she did, and I want my window fixed without paying for it myself." "Then here is my advice. Let the police investigation proceed. Give them your full statement, show them your evidence. The DA's office will decide whether to file charges. In the meantime, you should also send Deborah a formal demand letter requesting payment for damages. Give her a deadline, maybe 2 weeks. If she refuses or ignores it, you can file a small claims suit. That way you are covering both the criminal and civil angles." "What about her threat?" "She said she would make my life hell with HOA violations if I pursue this." Derek laughed. "That is retaliation, and it is illegal. If she starts targeting you with bogus fines after you filed a police report, that actually strengthens your case and gives you grounds to sue the HOA. She would be incredibly stupid to follow through on that threat. You do not know Deborah. Stupid might be her specialty. Well, document everything. Keep records of all fines, all communications, everything. If she retaliates, you will have proof. We talked for a few more minutes about practical next steps. Then I hung up feeling more confident. I spent the rest of the day cleaning up the broken glass and trying to make my house livable again. The power came back on that evening, thankfully, and I cranked up the heat to get the house back to a comfortable temperature. 3 days later, an officer from the Buffalo PD finally showed up to take my statement. His name was Officer Martinez, and he was professional and thorough. He examined the window, looked at my photos, and took detailed notes while I explained everything that had happened. "Has Miss Patterson contacted you since the incident?" he asked. "No, I have not heard from her at all." "Have you had any contact with her?" "I saw her at her house once. She was outside clearing snow from her driveway yesterday. We did not speak." Officer Martinez nodded. "Okay, I have everything I need. I will include this in my report and forward it to the detective unit and the DA's office. Someone will be in touch if they need anything else or if charges are filed." "How long does that usually take?" "Hard to say. Could be a few weeks, could be a couple months. Depends on the caseload and how strong they think the case is." "What are the chances charges actually get filed?" He hesitated. "Honestly, it could go either way. Breaking and entering is serious, but she could argue emergency circumstances. The property damage is pretty clear-cut, though. The DA might offer her a plea deal, something like pleading guilty to criminal mischief and paying restitution in exchange for dropping the B and E charge." "Would that be a felony?" "Criminal mischief can be charged as a misdemeanor or felony depending on the dollar amount of damage. If the window costs over $250 to fix, which it definitely will, they could charge fourth-degree criminal mischief, which is a misdemeanor. If it is over $1,000, it could be third degree, which is a felony. But again, that is up to the DA. After Officer Martinez left, I felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and anxiety. Things were in motion now, and there was no taking it back. Part of me wondered if I was overreacting, if I should have just let it go. But the larger part of me knew that Deborah needed to face consequences. She had been terrorizing the neighborhood with her petty tyranny for years, and it was time someone stood up to her. A week after the storm, I got my first indication that Deborah was not going down without a fight. I came home from work to find a letter from the HOA in my mailbox. Inside were 3 violation notices. The first was for unapproved exterior modification related to the plywood covering my broken window. The fine was $100 if not corrected within 7 days. The second was for failure to maintain clear walkways because I had not shoveled the snow from my sidewalk within 24 hours of the storm ending. That fine was $75. The third was for improper storage of trash receptacles because my garbage cans were visible from the street instead of being stored in my garage. Another $75. I called Derek immediately. "She is retaliating," I said. "Just like you said she might." "Perfect. Keep that letter. Do not pay those fines yet. This is exactly the kind of evidence you need. The plywood one is especially ridiculous. I am covering a broken window that she broke, and the whole neighborhood is still dealing with snow cleanup from the blizzard. Document everything. Take photos showing other houses that have not finished snow removal. Take photos showing other people's garbage cans. Build your case that she is singling you out." I did exactly that, spending an evening walking around the neighborhood with my camera. Sure enough, at least 6 other houses still had unshoveled sections of sidewalk, and 4 other houses had garbage cans visible from the street. but none of them had received violation notices. 2 weeks after the storm, I received a call from the Erie County District Attorney's office. The woman on the phone introduced herself as Assistant DA Monica Reeves. "Mr. Olson, I have reviewed the police report regarding the incident with Deborah Patterson. I wanted to discuss the case with you before making a charging decision." "Okay, I appreciate you calling. I have to be honest with you. This is a complicated case. Miss Patterson's attorney has already reached out to us claiming necessity defense. They are arguing that she faced imminent danger from the storm and that breaking into your home was a reasonable emergency action." "She had other options," I said. "There were other houses. She could have tried harder to wake me up. She could have stayed in her own house with more layers. Breaking my window was not her only choice." I agree that her choices could be questioned. However, proving criminal intent beyond a reasonable doubt might be challenging. A jury might be sympathetic to someone who made a snap decision during a dangerous blizzard. My heart sank. "So you are not going to file charges?" "I did not say that. I am saying that if we charge her with burglary, we might not get a conviction. However, I do think we have a strong case for criminal mischief. The damage to your property is well documented and substantial. I am considering offering her a deal. Plead guilty to fourth-degree criminal mischief, pay full restitution for the window repair, and serve 1 year of probation. In exchange, we would not pursue the breaking and entering charge. Fourth degree is a misdemeanor, right? Correct. Though with the dollar amount of damage you are describing, I could potentially charge third degree, which is a felony. But again, I am trying to be realistic about what we can prove and what a jury might accept. What happens if she does not take the deal? Then we go to trial and let a jury decide. But trials are expensive, time-consuming, and unpredictable. And even if we win, there is no guarantee the judge would impose a harsher sentence than what I am offering in the deal. I thought about it. A criminal conviction, even a misdemeanor, would be on Deborah's record. She would have to pay for my window, and she would be on probation, which might make her think twice about her behavior. What about the fact that she has been retaliating against me with HOA violations? I asked. That is a separate civil matter, unfortunately. You would need to pursue that through the HOA's dispute resolution process or file a lawsuit. I cannot charge her criminally for HOA harassment unless it crosses into stalking or criminal harassment territory. So she faces no consequences for trying to intimidate me into dropping the charges. Not through criminal court, no. But it does show a pattern of behavior that could help you in a civil case. And if she is on probation for the criminal mischief charge, any additional bad behavior could result in probation violation. We talked for a few more minutes, and I ultimately told her to proceed with offering the plea deal. It was not everything I wanted, but it was something. And it sent a clear message that Deborah could not just do whatever she wanted without consequences. 3 days later, Derek called me with interesting news. He had done some research into the Meadowbrook Springs HOA and discovered something fascinating. "Victor, did you know that the HOA has to follow specific procedures for issuing fines under New York law?" "No. What do you mean?" "They have to provide notice of the violation, give you an opportunity to respond or request a hearing, and follow their own bylaws regarding the fine schedule." I pulled up the Meadowbrook Springs HOA bylaws online. They are public record. According to their own rules, any fine over $50 requires a hearing before the HOA board if the homeowner requests one. I did not know I could request a hearing. That is because they did not tell you. The violation notices you received do not mention your right to a hearing. That is a procedural violation. Also, I looked at the bylaws regarding snow removal, and they actually allow 72 hours for walkway clearing after a storm, not 24 hours. And there is nothing in the bylaws about temporary emergency repairs being considered unapproved modifications. So these fines are bogus. At minimum, they are improperly issued. You should send a formal letter to the HOA board disputing all 3 fines and citing the specific bylaw violations. Request a hearing. I will help you draft it. What good will that do? Deborah is the HOA president. She will just deny my appeal. Not if you threaten to sue the HOA for violating its own bylaws and for retaliation. That gets the other board members' attention real quick. They do not want to be personally liable if the HOA gets sued. And if Deborah keeps pushing this, she could be voted out as president. You really think the other board members would go against her? I think they will cover their own butts. Nobody wants to be part of a lawsuit because the president is on a personal vendetta. Send the letter. See what happens. I followed Derek's advice and sent a detailed letter disputing the fines, citing chapter and verse from the HOA bylaws, and requesting a hearing before the full board. I sent it certified mail so there would be proof of delivery. A week later, I got a response. But it was not from Deborah. It was from Richard Chen, one of the other board members. The letter informed me that my request for a hearing had been granted and scheduled for the following Thursday evening. It also mentioned that certain procedural concerns had been raised regarding the violation notices, and that the board would be reviewing the matter thoroughly. Reading between the lines, it sounded like the other board members were not happy with Deborah. Meanwhile, I received word that Deborah had rejected the plea deal from the DA's office. According to Ada Reeves, Deborah's attorney was insisting that she had done nothing wrong and that any charges would be defeated by necessity defense. They were preparing to fight the case. So what happens now? I asked Reeves during our phone call. Now I file formal charges and we prepare for trial. Given that she rejected a reasonable offer, I am going to charge her with third-degree criminal mischief, the felony. She wants to play hardball. We will play hardball. What changed? I thought you were going to charge fourth degree. I reviewed the repair estimates you sent me. Your window is custom-sized and the damage to the frame and surrounding wall is more extensive than initially reported. Total repair costs are coming in around $3,000. That puts it solidly in felony territory. Plus, her attorney's response was incredibly arrogant and dismissive. They clearly think we will not follow through. I want to prove them wrong. When will this go to trial? Probably not for several months. Criminal cases move slowly, but the arraignment will be in about 2 weeks. She will have to come to court and enter a plea. The HOA hearing happened before the arraignment. I showed up to the community center meeting room to find all 5 board members present: Deborah, Richard Chen, Margaret Sullivan, James Cooper, and Patricia Gray. About a dozen other homeowners were also there, apparently curious about the drama. Deborah sat at the center of the table, looking composed and confident. But the other board members looked uncomfortable. Richard Chen, a retired accountant who seemed like a reasonable guy from the few times I had interacted with him, called the meeting to order. We are here tonight to address Mr. Olson's dispute regarding 3 violation notices issued by the HOA. Mr. Olson, you may present your case. I stood up and outlined my arguments, citing the specific bylaw provisions that Deborah had either violated or misapplied. I pointed out the procedural failures in the notice process. I presented photos showing other properties with similar supposed violations that had not received notices. When I finished, Deborah stood up, her face flushed. This is ridiculous. Mr. Olson is trying to use technicalities to avoid responsibility for clear violations of our community standards. The bylaws give the HOA president discretion in enforcing rules, and I was well within my authority to issue these notices. Actually, Deborah, that is not quite accurate, Richard said carefully. He was holding a copy of the bylaws with several pages marked with sticky notes. The bylaws are very specific about procedure, and there are some concerns about whether proper protocol was followed here. Concerns? What concerns? Margaret Sullivan, a retired teacher who had always struck me as kind but mild-mannered, spoke up. Deborah, I have to agree with Richard. I reviewed the bylaws after receiving Mr. Olson's letter, and he is right about several points. We did not follow our own rules in issuing these notices. Not to mention, James Cooper added, the timing here looks really bad. These notices were issued just days after Mr. Olson filed a police report against you, Deborah. It certainly gives the appearance of retaliation. Deborah's face went from flushed to red. I was doing my job. The fact that Mr. Olson chose to pursue baseless criminal charges against me does not mean I should stop enforcing HOA rules. But you are not enforcing them consistently, Patricia Gray said quietly. She was the youngest board member, probably in her early 30s, and rarely spoke up at meetings. I drove around the neighborhood before tonight's meeting. There are currently 7 properties with visible garbage cans and at least 10 that still have not fully cleared their sidewalks. But Victor is the only one who received violation notices. I cannot monitor every property every day, Deborah protested. No, but when you only cite one person and that person happens to be someone you have a personal conflict with, it raises serious questions, Richard said. I am going to make a motion that we rescind all 3 violation notices issued to Mr. Olson and return any fines paid. I second that motion, Margaret said immediately. This is outrageous, Deborah said. You are undermining my authority as president. We are protecting the HOA from potential legal liability, Richard said firmly. All in favor, 4 hands went up. Only Deborah's stayed down. Motion carries. Mr. Olson, your fines are rescinded and we apologize for the improper procedure. Thank you, I said. While we are on the subject, Richard continued, I would like to propose that we implement new procedures requiring board approval for any fine over $100 and mandatory review of any case where a homeowner requests a hearing. This will ensure we are following our bylaws and treating all residents fairly. That motion also passed 4-1, with Deborah being the sole opposition. As the meeting broke up, several neighbors came up to me and quietly thanked me for standing up to Deborah. Apparently, I was not the only one who had been dealing with her overzealous enforcement. She fined me $200 because my Christmas lights were the wrong shade of white, one man told me. Said they were too blue-tinted and not warm white like the rules specify. She tried to fine us for having a pink flamingo lawn ornament, a woman added. Said it was not on the approved decoration list. It was a birthday gift from my daughter. The stories went on. It seemed that Deborah had made enemies throughout the entire neighborhood, but people had been too intimidated to fight back. Now that I had opened the door, others were feeling braver. As I left, Deborah caught up with me in the parking lot. You think you won something tonight, she hissed. You just made a very big mistake. I will make sure you regret this. Is that another threat, Deborah? Because you are already facing criminal charges. You really want to add harassment to that? I am not harassing you. I am promising you that your life in this community will be miserable. Every single thing you do, I will be watching. Every tiny violation, you will be cited. I will make you want to move. You should probably talk to your lawyer before you keep making threats, I said, because this conversation is being recorded. I pulled out my phone and showed her the voice memo app running. Her eyes widened, then narrowed. "You are a real piece of work, you know that." "I learned from the best," I said, and walked to my car. The arraignment happened 2 weeks later. I was not required to be there, but I went anyway. I wanted to see Deborah face the charges. The courtroom was busy, with dozens of cases being processed. When Deborah's case was called, she stood up with her attorney, a slick-looking guy in an expensive suit named Marcus Aldridge. The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Judge Patricia Hoffman, read out the charge: third-degree criminal mischief, a Class E felony. "How does the defendant plead?" Judge Hoffman asked. "Not guilty, Your Honor," Aldridge said smoothly. "And we would like to request that this case be dismissed." My client acted reasonably in an emergency situation to preserve her own life. Any damage caused was purely incidental and necessary. "That is a matter for trial, not arraignment," Judge Hoffman said. "Bail." "The people request bail of $10,000, Ada Reeves said. "The defendant has shown a pattern of threatening behavior toward the victim, including documented retaliation and verbal threats." "That is outrageous," Aldridge protested. "Miss Patterson is a respected community leader with no criminal record. She is not a flight risk and poses no danger to anyone. She broke into the victim's home and has since engaged in systematic harassment," Reeves countered. "The people believe conditions are necessary to ensure the victim's safety." Judge Hoffman looked at Deborah thoughtfully. "I am going to release the defendant on her own recognizance, but I am imposing a stay-away order. Miss Patterson, you are to have no direct or indirect contact with the victim, Victor Olson. That means no phone calls, no texts, no emails, no showing up at his house, and no having third parties contact him on your behalf. If you violate this order, I will revoke your release and set bail. Do you understand?" "Yes, Your Honor," Deborah said stiffly. Next court date is set for preliminary hearing on March 15th. We are adjourned. And just like that, it was over. Deborah and her lawyer left quickly, not making eye contact with me. Ada Reeves came over to where I was sitting. "The stay-away order is important," she said. "If she contacts you or tries to harass you through the HOA or anything else, document it and contact me immediately. That becomes evidence of her intent and state of mind. What about HOA stuff? She is still the president. The order does not prevent her from participating in legitimate HOA business that affects all residents. But if she singles you out or takes any action that could be seen as targeting you personally, that is a violation. Use your judgment, and when in doubt, call me." Over the next few weeks, things settled into an uneasy peace. Deborah did not contact me directly, and I received no more violation notices from the HOA. But I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that tensions were high among the board members. Apparently, Richard Chen and the other board members had confronted Deborah about her behavior and strongly suggested she resign as president. She had refused, leading to a standoff. Richard was now circulating a petition among homeowners to call a special election for the HOA board, which could potentially result in Deborah being voted out. My window finally got repaired in early March. The contractor did a beautiful job, and you could not even tell there had been damage. The bill came to $3,200, which I submitted to both my insurance company and to Deborah's attorney as part of the restitution demand. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for March 15th, as Judge Hoffman had ordered. This was where the prosecution would present evidence to show probable cause that a crime had been committed and that Deborah had committed it. I had to testify at the preliminary hearing, which was nerve-wracking. I sat in the witness box while Ada Reeves walked me through the events of that night. "Mr. Olson, can you describe what woke you up in the early morning hours of the blizzard?" she asked. I heard breaking glass and the sound of wind howling through my house, I said. Then I heard footsteps on my floor downstairs. What did you do? I grabbed a baseball bat and went downstairs to see what was happening. I found Deborah Patterson standing in my living room. My front window was completely shattered. Did you give Miss Patterson permission to enter your home? Absolutely not. Did you give her permission to break your window? No. What reason did she give for breaking the window? She said her house had lost heat and she needed to get warm. She said she could see my fireplace was working and that was why she chose my house. Reeves introduced the photos of the damage into evidence, along with the repair bills and a map showing the layout of the neighborhood. Then it was Aldridge's turn to cross-examine me. Mr. Olson, you have had conflicts with Miss Patterson before this incident, correct? He asked. She has issued me several HOA violation notices in the past, yes. So you already did not like her. I thought she was overly strict about enforcing HOA rules, but I did not have any personal animosity toward her. But you were angry when she issued you those violations. I thought they were petty, yes. And when you found her in your house that night, you were angry. I was shocked and confused first, then yes, I became angry when I realized what she had done. Did you threaten her? No. Did you tell her to leave? Not immediately. It was still a dangerous blizzard outside. I was not going to throw her out into the storm, even though I was angry about what she had done. So you allowed her to stay, under duress. The alternative was to potentially let someone freeze to death. That does not mean I consented to her breaking in. But you let her stay for hours. You worked together to board up the window. You shared food with her. That does not sound like someone who felt violated or threatened. Just because I did not let someone die does not mean they did not commit a crime by breaking into my house, I said. Aldridge kept pressing, trying to paint me as someone with a grudge who was blowing an innocent emergency decision out of proportion. But I stuck to the facts. Deborah had broken my window, entered my home without permission, and caused significant damage. After both sides presented their evidence, Judge Hoffman ruled that there was sufficient probable cause to proceed to trial. The trial was scheduled for May. In April, the HOA had its special election. Richard Chen had successfully gathered signatures from enough homeowners to force a vote on all board positions. The turnout was huge, with over 80% of homeowners voting. When the results were announced, Deborah had lost her seat on the board entirely. Richard was elected as the new president, Margaret Sullivan was vice president, and 3 new members joined the board. It was a complete repudiation of Deborah's leadership. I heard from a neighbor that Deborah was furious and had threatened to sue the HOA for wrongful termination, even though board members are elected volunteers who can be voted out at any time. Her attorney apparently talked her out of that idea. As the trial date approached, Ada Reeves called me to discuss strategy. Aldridge is still pushing the necessity defense hard, she said. He is going to argue that Deborah faced imminent danger and that her actions were reasonable under the circumstances. We need to be ready to counter that. How do we do that? By showing she had other options. I am subpoenaing weather records to show the exact conditions that night. I'm also calling a survival expert to testify about what someone in a cold house should do before resorting to breaking into someone else's property. And we have your testimony about the layout of the neighborhood and the other houses available. What are my chances here? Honestly, I think we have a strong case, but juries can be unpredictable, especially in cases with sympathetic defendants. A middle-aged woman claiming she was freezing to death in a blizzard is going to get some sympathy, but the evidence is on our side. The trial began on May 4th. Jury selection took a full day. with both sides questioning potential jurors about their ability to be impartial and their views on emergency situations and property rights. The prosecution's case began on day 2. Ada Reeves delivered a strong opening statement, arguing that while emergencies can justify extraordinary actions, Deborah's decision to break into my home was neither reasonable nor necessary. The evidence will show that the defendant had multiple other options available to her, Reeves told the jury. She could have stayed in her own home with additional clothing and blankets. She could have tried to reach other neighbors. She could have attempted to contact emergency services. Instead, she chose to destroy Mr. Olson's property and invade his home. That was not necessity. That was convenience. Aldridge's opening statement painted a very different picture. He described Deborah as a terrified woman watching her house temperature drop to dangerous levels, unable to get her car started, unable to reach anyone for help, seeing my fireplace through the window and making a split-second decision to seek warmth. My client did what any of us would have done in that situation, Aldridge said. She saw a light in the darkness, literally, and she went toward it. She knocked first. She tried to get Mr. Olson's attention. When that failed and she feared for her life, she took the only action available to her. That is not a crime. That is survival. The testimony took 3 days. I was the first witness, going through the same story I had told at the preliminary hearing. This time, Aldridge's cross-examination was even more aggressive. Mr. Olson, is not it true that you have filed multiple complaints against Miss Patterson with the HOA board? He asked. I disputed some of the violation notices she issued, yes. You accused her of harassment, did not you? I said that I felt she was targeting me unfairly with violations. You wanted her removed as HOA president. I wanted the HOA to be run more fairly. If that meant her being removed, then yes. So when you had the opportunity to file criminal charges against her, you jumped at it, did not you? I filed charges because she committed a crime, not because of HOA politics. The survival expert, a man named Dr. Raymond Cole, who specialized in cold weather emergencies, testified about the stages of hypothermia and what actions are appropriate in various situations. He explained that while prolonged exposure to cold could certainly be dangerous, someone in a house that still had insulation and shelter had multiple options before resorting to breaking into another building. What temperature was inside Miss Patterson's house that night? Reeves asked. According to her own statements, approximately 42 degrees Fahrenheit, Dr. Cole said. Is that immediately life-threatening? No, not immediately. It is cold and certainly uncomfortable, but with proper clothing, layers, and blankets, a person can remain safe at that temperature for an extended period. Hypothermia generally begins to set in when core body temperature drops below 95 degrees, which takes substantial time and exposure even in cold conditions. What should someone do in that situation? Put on multiple layers of clothing, including a hat and gloves. Get under blankets. Minimize exposed skin. Drink warm fluids if available. Move to the smallest room in the house to conserve body heat. If possible, create a tent with blankets to trap warmth. There are many strategies. On cross-examination, Aldridge tried to shake Dr. Cole's testimony. But every person responds to cold differently, correct? That is true to some extent. And a smaller person, perhaps an older woman, might be more susceptible to cold than a larger, younger person. Generally speaking, yes, though there are many factors. So it is possible that Miss Patterson was in real danger, even if someone else might not have been in the same situation. It is possible, but unlikely given the time frame and conditions described. The prosecution also called a meteorologist who testified about the exact weather conditions that night. While severe, the storm had not reached peak intensity when Deborah broke into my house. The worst winds and lowest temperatures came several hours later. Deborah took the stand in her own defense, which was a risky move. Aldridge walked her through her version of events, painting her as a scared woman making a panicked decision. "I was so cold I could not think straight," she testified, her voice shaking. "I tried everything I could think of in my own house, but the temperature just kept dropping. I put on every piece of clothing I owned, I got under every blanket I had, but I was still shaking so hard I could not function. I was terrified. I genuinely thought I might die." "Why did you choose Mr. Olson's house?" Aldridge asked. "I could see the glow from his fireplace through his windows. I knew he had heat, and his house was the closest one to mine. I did not think I could make it much further." "Did you try to get his attention before breaking the window?" "Yes, I knocked on his door and windows as hard as I could. I even yelled, but he did not answer. I assumed he was asleep or could not hear me over the storm. I did not know what else to do." "Why did not you just stay in your own house?" "Because I thought I was going to freeze to death," she said, and tears started rolling down her cheeks. "I was so scared. I was not thinking clearly. I just wanted to survive." It was a compelling performance, and I could see some of the jurors looking sympathetic. But then Reeves stood up for cross-examination. "Miss Patterson, you testified that you tried everything in your own house. Did you move to a smaller room?" "I do not remember." "Did you create any kind of enclosed space with blankets?" "I do not think so." "Did you try to contact emergency services?" "My phone was dead." "But your phone was not dead when you first noticed your house was cold, was it?" "What time did you first realize you had a problem?" Deborah hesitated. "Maybe around 11 or midnight. And you did not call anyone for help at that time." "I thought I could handle it myself." "So you did not actually try everything before breaking into Mr. Olson's home. You made a judgment call that it would be easier to go to his house than to properly prepare your own house or seek official help." "I was scared." "I am sure you were, but being scared does not give you the right to destroy someone else's property, does it?" "I did not have a choice." "You had several choices, Miss Patterson. You chose the one that involved committing a crime." Reeves also brought up Deborah's history with me, the violation notices, the timing of them, the retaliation. She painted a picture of someone who was already hostile toward me and who used the storm as an excuse to violate my space. "You do not like Mr. Olson, do you?" Reeves asked. "I do not have personal feelings about residents. I enforce rules." "But you admit you have issued him multiple violations." "He has had multiple violations of HOA rules, yes. And after he filed a police report against you, you issued him 3 more violations in 1 week. Violations that the HOA board later rescinded as improperly issued." "That seems personal, doesn't it?" "I was doing my job." "Your job as HOA president, which you lost in a special election after this incident, correct? The election was politically motivated. Or perhaps the other homeowners decided you had abused your authority one too many times." Aldridge objected to that, and Judge Hoffman sustained it, but the point had been made. Closing arguments happened on the afternoon of the 3rd day. Both attorneys summarized their cases passionately. Aldridge again emphasized the emergency nature of the situation and asked the jury to imagine themselves in Deborah's position. Reeves emphasized the evidence showing Deborah had other options and the suspicious timing of her decision. The jury deliberated for almost 8 hours, breaking for the evening and resuming the next morning. When they finally returned, I was a nervous wreck. "Will the defendant please rise?" Judge Hoffman said, Deborah stood, her face pale with Aldridge beside her. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" "We have, Your Honor," the jury foreman said. "What say you?" "On the charge of third-degree criminal mischief, we find the defendant guilty." Deborah's knees buckled slightly, and Aldridge put a hand on her arm to steady her. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Judge Hoffman thanked the jury and dismissed them, then turned to Deborah. "Sentencing is scheduled for June 2nd. You will remain released on your own recognizance until that time, with the stay-away order still in effect. Court is adjourned." As people filed out of the courtroom, Ada Reeves came over to me. "That was a good verdict," she said. "Third-degree criminal mischief is a Class E felony. She is looking at possible jail time, though more likely probation as a first-time offender, but she will definitely owe you restitution." "What is the typical sentence?" "For a first offense with this level of damage, probably somewhere between 1 to 3 years probation, community service, and full restitution. The judge might give her some jail time, but probably not more than a few months, if any." Sentencing day arrived on June 2nd. The courtroom was less crowded this time. I sat in the gallery while Deborah and her attorney stood before Judge Hoffman. Aldridge gave an impassioned plea for leniency, emphasizing that Deborah had no criminal record, was a longtime community member, and had acted out of fear rather than malice. He asked for probation and restitution with no jail time. Ada Reeves argued that Deborah had shown no real remorse, had continued to maintain she did nothing wrong despite the jury's verdict, and had engaged in retaliatory behavior. She recommended a split sentence of 6 months in county jail, followed by 3 years probation. Judge Hoffman listened to both sides, reviewed the pre-sentencing report, and then addressed Deborah directly. "Miss Patterson, you were convicted of a felony. While I understand the jury rejected the more serious burglary charge, the fact remains that you committed a serious crime. You destroyed someone's property and invaded their home. Your claims of necessity were rejected by the jury, and the evidence showed you had other reasonable options available to you." Deborah stood silently, her jaw clenched. "However, I also note that this is your first offense and that the circumstances, while not excusing your behavior, were unusual. I am going to sentence you to 2 years probation. During that time, you will complete 200 hours of community service. You will pay full restitution to Mr. Olson for all damages, including the window repair and any related costs. The total restitution amount is $3,800, which includes the window, frame damage, and cleanup costs. Additionally, the stay-away order will remain in effect for the full probation period. You are to have no contact with Mr. Olson whatsoever. If you violate any term of your probation, including the stay-away order or failure to pay restitution, you will be brought back before me and could face up to 18 months in jail. Do you understand?" "Yes, Your Honor," Deborah said quietly. "I want to be very clear about something," Judge Hoffman continued. "Emergency situations do not give people carte blanche to violate the law. You could have made different choices that night. You could have prepared better. You could have sought help through proper channels. You could have tried harder to wake up Mr. Olson without breaking his window. Instead, you took the path of least resistance for yourself without regard for the consequences to someone else. That shows poor judgment at best and a sense of entitlement at worst. I hope you use this probation period to reflect on that." And with that, it was over. Deborah was officially a convicted felon, on probation for 2 years, and ordered to pay me back every penny. As I left the courthouse that day, I felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and exhaustion. The whole ordeal had taken 7 months from start to finish. The restitution payment came in installments over the next 6 months. Deborah apparently had to set up a payment plan, which meant I received monthly checks of about $630. Each one that arrived felt like a small victory. The Meadowbrook Springs HOA, under Richard Chen's leadership, became a much more pleasant organization to deal with. Richard implemented clear procedures for violations, required board approval for all fines over $50, and created an anonymous complaint process so homeowners could report problems without fear of retaliation. The neighborhood actually started to feel like a community instead of a police state. I ran into Deborah only once during her probation period. I was at the grocery store and I saw her in the produce section. She saw me at the same time, and for a moment we just stared at each other. Then she turned and walked away quickly, probably mindful of the stay-away order. She looked older, more tired, less polished than the imperious HOA president I had known. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she put her house up for sale about 6 months after sentencing. She moved to a condo in Amherst, outside of the HOA's jurisdiction. Good riddance, most of the neighbors said. The new family that moved into her house was friendly and normal, without a trace of petty tyranny. As for me, life gradually returned to normal. My window looked perfect, showing no signs of the damage it had suffered that awful night. The plywood and duct tape were long gone, replaced by proper glass and trim. When winter rolled around again, I made sure to stock up on emergency supplies early. Extra blankets, battery-powered heaters, plenty of non-perishable food, backup phone chargers. I was not going to be caught unprepared again. The whole experience taught me some important lessons. First, standing up to bullies matters even when it is hard and exhausting. If I had not pursued charges against Deborah, she would have continued her reign of terror over the neighborhood indefinitely. By holding her accountable, I helped create space for positive change. Second, following proper procedures and documenting everything is crucial. If I had not taken photos, kept records, and followed Derek's advice about the HOA bylaws, things could have gone very differently. Evidence matters, especially when dealing with people who think they are above the rules. Third, the legal system works, but slowly and imperfectly. It took 7 months and a full trial to get justice, and even then the sentence was lighter than I might have hoped. But it worked. Deborah was held accountable. I was made whole financially. The process functioned as it was supposed to. Looking back, I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I had just let it go that morning after the storm. If I had accepted Deborah's excuse about an emergency and moved on. Would she have paid for the window voluntarily? Probably not. Would she have continued retaliating against me with HOA violations? Almost certainly. Would she have continued making other neighbors' lives miserable? Definitely. By pressing charges, I changed the trajectory not just for myself but for the entire community. That feels like something worth all the stress and hassle. The neighborhood is better now. People are happier. The HOA serves the community instead of terrorizing it. I still live in the same house on Meadowbrook Springs Drive. I still have the same 3-bedroom ranch with the now perfect front window, but the neighborhood feels different now. Friendlier, more relaxed. People actually talk to each other without fear of being reported for some minor violation. Richard Chen stopped by a few months ago to drop off some updated HOA documents. We ended up talking for over an hour on my front porch, something I never would have done during Deborah's reign. "You know," Richard said at one point, "a lot of people wanted to do what you did. Stand up to her, I mean, but nobody had the guts. We were all just trying to fly under the radar and avoid becoming her next target." "I did not really have a choice," I said. She broke my window. That was pretty hard to ignore. Richard laughed. True. But you could have tried to settle it quietly. A lot of people would have. Instead, you followed through with everything, even when she tried to retaliate, even when it meant a trial. That took courage, or stubbornness. My ex-wife would probably say stubbornness. Potato, potato, Richard said with a grin. Either way, we are all grateful. The neighborhood is so much better now. That conversation stayed with me. It is easy to think your actions only affect yourself, but that is rarely true, especially in a community. What I did rippled outward in ways I did not fully anticipate. Neighbors started speaking up more at HOA meetings. People stopped being afraid to put up decorations or paint their shutters a slightly different shade than the approved list. The community became more human and less regulated. One unexpected benefit was that property values actually increased. Turns out that when an HOA is not run by a tyrant, people want to live there. Multiple houses sold within months of Deborah leaving, all at or above asking price. The real estate agent started marketing Meadowbrook Springs as a friendly, well-managed community, instead of just another cookie-cutter suburb. I even made some genuine friends among my neighbors, something I had not really tried to do before all this happened. The whole experience, as terrible as it was at the time, ended up connecting me to the community in a deeper way. Shared adversity creates bonds, I guess. The last I heard of Deborah, she had finished her probation successfully and was living quietly in her Amherst condo. No word on whether she learned anything from the experience or whether she is just waiting for an opportunity to become some other community's problem. I hope for everyone's sake that she learned something, but I am not particularly optimistic. What I know for certain is that she learned she could not break the law without consequences, even if she thought she had a good reason. She learned that homeowners have rights, and even HOA presidents are not above the law. She learned that retaliation has consequences. Whether those lessons stick is up to her. As for me, I learned that I am capable of standing up for myself when it really matters. I learned that the legal system, for all its flaws, can provide justice if you are willing to work through the process. I learned that communities are made better when people refuse to accept petty tyranny as the price of peace. And I learned to always keep my phone charged during a blizzard. It has been over 2 years now since that night when breaking glass woke me from sleep. 2 years since I found Deborah Patterson standing in my living room surrounded by shattered glass and swirling snow. 2 years since my life became entangled with the criminal justice system, HOA politics, and neighborhood drama. Life has moved on. The house is peaceful. The neighborhood is thriving. My window remains intact through every storm. And I sleep soundly, knowing that if anyone ever tries to break into my house again, I know exactly what to do and how the system works. The whole experience, as awful as it was while I was living through it, gave me something valuable: confidence, knowledge, connection to my community, a sense of agency in the face of injustice. Those are things you cannot put a price on. So yes, Deborah broke my window during a blizzard. Yes, she woke up to find herself facing felony charges for breaking and entering and criminal mischief. Yes, she was convicted and sentenced and forced to pay restitution. And yes, it all worked out the way it should have. Justice, it turns out, is not just about punishment. It is about accountability, consequences, and the message sent to everyone else. It is about drawing a line and saying this far and no further. It is about refusing to accept that some people can break the rules while everyone else has to follow them. That night during the blizzard, when I heard breaking glass, I had a choice. I could have chosen to ignore it, to let it slide, to accept Deborah's excuses and move on. Instead, I chose to demand accountability. That choice changed everything, not just for me, but for everyone around me. Sometimes standing up is hard. Sometimes it is expensive and time-consuming and stressful. Sometimes you wonder if it is worth it. But in the end, when you look around and see a better, healthier community, when you know you made a difference, the answer is clear. It was worth it. Every single moment of it was worth it.